Well, hello. It is Thursday, and we are exploring all things book marketing channels. I'm so happy to be here with you today and really deep dive into identifying what channels are going to be the perfect fit for your buyer. I will warn you ahead of time. I've already had technology shenanigans, so expect them. It'll make it fun. It'll make it fresh, right? If anything, it will just remind us that this writing journey, whether it is our launch or it's writing the book or pitching the book, always leave room for plenty of grace. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be deep diving into choosing the marketing channels that are the best fit for you and the best fit for your buyer. We've already talked about who that buyer is. We've talked about the message that that buyer needs to hear from you. So today we choose how to best communicate that message to the buyer in a way that helps launch your book well. So again, the slide says part 3, choose your marketing channels. Aren't you glad that I can read? I can. Hopefully everyone else can too, including your buyer. So sorry, I have a weird sense of humor today. Hopefully it will be entertaining as well as educational. So let's move to the first step we have to take when we choose a marketing channel. And just so you know what I mean by marketing channel, and I think I've already said it or touched on it just a little bit, a marketing channel is simply the path that you are choosing to take your message directly to your buyers. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through these steps as to how best to choose those channels for your buyer. And remember that too. It's not somebody else's buyer, it is your buyer. There are 3 questions that can really help you establish how to take step number 1, which is just simply understanding your buyer's habits. And we're going to talk a little bit about how there are online habits and offline habits, and those are really important to identify as you choose these marketing channels. The way that you are going to be able to do that best is by answering these 3 questions. The first question is going to be, where does your buyer spend his or her time online? And I am sorry, Rob Robinson, or any other gentlemen who are watching this, I did not mean to exclude you in any way, shape, or form. So again, where does your buyer, not somebody else's, where does your buyer, the person you envision picking this book up at a bookstore or seeing it on social media, where do they spend their time online? Do they frequent social media platforms? Instagram, maybe visuals are important. So Instagram would be a big one to connect with them. Maybe it's a professional audience that you have. I know I mentioned in the previous PowerPoint that I did that I ghost wrote a book for a guy who is creating a book as a piece of marketing material for his lead generation business and training business. So for him, I never see him on Instagram. I never see him on Facebook. The place he posts is in LinkedIn because that's where his buyer is. That's where his market is. So always keep that in mind when you are trying to identify where does your buyer spend his or her time online. That's where you need to go, and that's where you need to make sure you hone in your marketing efforts. Now, I also want to say this about where buyers spend their time online. There are niche forums, and that is just a very complicated way of saying under the different social media platforms, like for instance, Facebook, there are certain niche platforms that are attached to that. And a niche platform in Facebook would be considered like a Facebook page, your author page. Or I know I had a sweet gal who was an author that I followed quite a bit early on in her journey that wrote a book on miscarriage. It was called Unexpecting. And before she even had a book to put into their hands, she started a Facebook group called Brave Mamas. That's where she met her people. That's where she invested in her people. And that's where she really grew a buying audience 6 months to almost, I think, a year ahead of time before her book even launched. So that's what I mean by a niche forum. The second question you need to ask yourself is, where does your buyer connect with the community in person? I'm going to take a little drink. Hey, no, never mind. I have a wonky voice today, so I will err on the side of being not so professional to make sure that I can still talk and you can hear me. So things that you might look into here when you're asking the question, where does my reader, where does he or she connect with the community at large? Ask questions like, do they attend church? Do they attend community events? Are they part of a local book club? Or is there another group that they hone in on or spend their time in? You're really just looking for, where does your buyer spend time online and in person? For those of you who have an older audience, my guess is you're going to be able to find a lot of places where you can meet them in person, because they are of a generation that person-to-person contact was where they lived for most of their lives. And so that personal touch is going to be important. Another place where you're going to find that would be an audience or a buyer with small children. We're always taking our kids somewhere, especially during seasons like this, where we have had, bless our hearts, 7 snow days or 7 days off in a row. And we're all thinking, oh, we just had spring break part 2, 20, and 25. I went to the library, and let me tell you, every mother with small children was there because they needed to get out of the house. Think of those kind of places, especially if you're a children's book author. That is going to be another area where you're going to be able to connect with your buyer very specifically, because you are meeting them where they are spending their time. The third and final question you can ask yourself when you're really trying to pinpoint what your buyer's habits are is, how does your buyer, how does he or she prefer to receive information? And this is different than the other questions. Do they listen to podcasts? Do they listen or watch YouTube videos? I guess it would be watch YouTube videos because you can see me and we are on YouTube. Blog articles. Do they rely on, oh, here's a big one. Do they rely on recommendations from family and friends? Let's go back to that parent audience. For me, we are now in a season where this fits perfectly. We have something that we're trying to do for one of our kiddos, and we tried it the first time around by just winging it. Somebody said, try this, we did, and it did not go well. So you can best be believing, as we're attempting to provide the same thing for that kiddo again, we are making sure we get a recommendation, a seconded recommendation, looking at the people who actually have personal experience from a professional standpoint. We're covering all our bases because it's our kids. It's our heart. And we want to make sure that not only is it just some social media posts that we see go across our Instagram feed, but people that we trust say, this is something you should buy or pursue. So if you want to put this in practice, here's what I would like you to do. And I'm telling you what, trying to go in between screens and all over the place, I might as well be scrambling my brain, but at least you know me scrambled and love me anyway. So here is what you can try to do as you're trying to put into practice this idea of where does my buyer go? What are my buyer's habits? Where do they spend their time? I want you to really take a quick minute, take a quick 3 minutes, as the slide says. Come on, Sara, for the love. And I want you to write down the top 3 places your buyer is spending their time. So the top 3, it could be online, it could be offline, it could be social media, it could be a community group. Don't overthink it, just do it. Starting there will lay that groundwork as you then begin to explore the different channels that you can choose when you're marketing your book for launch time. So again, take that time, whether you want to do it now or you want to go back to this training and jump into that at that point. That also works as well. For me, I am just going to take us on to step number 2, which is where we're really going to focus on how to match the marketing channels that fit your buyer's needs. So first we establish what their needs are. We establish what their habits are. We create a message that communicates what our book does for them. But then we need to match the channels that we're going to use in order to market our book with that buyer's needs. And we do that by understanding that every marketing channel serves a slightly different purpose. And so it may not necessarily make sense for you to just focus on one. But let me say this once more. If you've heard me speak on any topic, I say this: don't overwhelm yourself. The biggest step to inaction is too much information on your plate. Give yourself the grace of baby steps. And even going back to this exercise that I have on the PowerPoint presentation, let's say 3 places overwhelms you. Start with 1 and you're making progress. So now let's jump into the different channels. And I'm slightly behind on the PowerPoint, but we're going to just lickety split, move through step number 2, match channels to your buyer's habits. And here are the channels that we're going to jump into for the purpose of this training. So the very first are going to be everything that we know and love, social media, and all its wonderful, beautiful, frustrating ways. Now, I say that partly in jest because when you know why you're using it and who you're using it to attract, it's not so bad. And it can actually be an amazing tool. So when we talk about the first channel that you can pursue, social media platform, there are, for those of you who are kind of new to all the social media stuff, and even for those of you who maybe you have your feet in a bunch of different areas, go where your people are. For me, before I launched my book, my people were on Facebook. I have the biggest following there. And yeah, other people love Instagram. Other people love Twitter. Other people love Pinterest. But if you don't go where your people are, you're going to miss out on really maximizing using social media as a platform. Pardon. Now, let's say you're just starting out, or you're really trying to figure out which platform is going to be the best to market your book and get it launched well. Instagram. Instagram is great for appealing content like quotes, pictures, illustrations, photos of your book. It's ideal for parents, young adults, or creative audiences. If that is a place where you see your buyer going, then that's where you should go. Now, Facebook is a little bit different. It's a little older crowd. It is also, I would say, one that really fosters community well. So if, like my friend who was writing the book and marketing it before she ever launched it with that Facebook group, I'm having a hard time getting my words out today. Good grief. But that group was really what provided not only connection for her readers, but it also allowed her to really get the pulse on what her buyer needed. And the only way that she was really going to be able to do that on social media at that time was through a Facebook group. So if you're trying to foster community, Facebook is probably the channel you'll want to choose. Also, already talked about LinkedIn. If you're focused on a more professional need, professional message, that's where you go. Go where your people are, and it won't be a bad decision. The second channel for our purposes that we're going to explore are email newsletters and blogs. Now, and again, this is how it's really, and not only how does it really make sense? This is why identifying who your buyer is, where they spend their time is important before you explore all the different types of channels. Because if you don't know these things, then you won't be able to identify whether or not it's a good fit. Again, matching channel to the buyer's need. So the second one, email newsletters and blogs. If your buyer prefers long form, insightful content, consider creating a blog or email series that builds as you get closer and closer to launch, and then also gives them something after launch. I've seen this happen a million times where people like create all this interest and drumming up like, oh, and then the book launches and then it's like, wah, 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 wah. And it's like, I'm just dropping you cold. Make sure that you meet them not just up until launch day, but you have a more global perspective as to how you're going to continue to feed those channels post launch day. So also, I would say this is another area that you may need to consider where your audience is in life. When I had small children, and quite frankly, even now with a bunch of teenagers and young adults, I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of in-depth reading. So if you have somebody who's in a phase of life that can't really deep dive into that content, that's going to be important to know as well. And a lot of times, people where they spend their time will also tell you how much content their life affords them to be able to handle. So we've got social media platforms as one channel. We have email newsletters and blogs as another. Our third one is physical spaces, which is just a fancy place Oh, wait, fancy. Oh, good heavens. Maybe I need to take another sip. A fancy way of saying, where are they hanging out? Where are they? Where are your buyers physically going? Kind of going back to when parents go to the library to escape the humdrum of the dark winter days. Physical spaces would be considered a separate channel, and it would be one that goes beyond what is offered online. So think here, talked about libraries, bookstores, churches, places where you can go where a book signing makes a lot of sense. And a lot of times you will, well, here's an example of this. I was asked to do a book signing at an apple orchard, which was so great. And it was such a genuine offer. But what happened when somebody asked if I would do one at the apple orchard, their season where it would make the most sense for buyers to come and really maximize a book signing experience was also during their busiest season. There were people everywhere. I mean, small children melting down, large children melting down, parents melting down, apples and donuts. And the chaos of the situation didn't necessarily match what was needed in order for a book signing to be a success. Same thing here. When you're trying to identify a channel, a physical space that would market your book well for a book signing, make sure you choose a place and a location that is going to maximize the impact of your presence there, but also really minimize the amount of things you have to overcome to get noticed. That's important. The other thing to kind of think of in this particular channel is you want to partner with organizations that really resonate with your audience, with your message. There's a book that I was just reading about, I think it was yesterday. It's a sweet little book. It's like, Where Did TJ Go? Something like that. Something like that was the title, Where Did TJ Go? And it was a book that was written for, and this will probably make me teary just because I'm emotional, and there we go. But it was a book for an older sibling about what happens when there is a loss of an infant or a stillbirth. And this idea, where did TJ go, was what happened to my baby brother? What happened to my baby sister? And putting it in terms that the reader, the person who, as we talked about before, the buying audience is the parent. The parent is struggling to communicate a message to that sweet baby, and the book is the solution. In that case, partnering with organizations that also value that message, that also serve that audience, again, for both of you, minimizes input, but maximizes the benefit to both of you. It benefits the organization because they're serving that particular buyer, that particular person, and they are passionate about your message already. That is going to be an efficient way to market your book, to launch your book, by making very intentional partnerships with organizations that resonate with your message. So don't ever discount that. And they can only say yes if you ask. Don't be afraid to ask. You'll be surprised what opportunities God will give you along the way. All right, so the fourth channel, and I realize here I probably should have said something other than other. No, I wasn't saying the same word twice because I forgot. I should have titled this organic channels, word of mouth channels. This is going to align kind of with that need of a buyer to have like recommendations or reviews or people that they trust, they feel are credible, endorsing your book, endorsing your message, saying this is something you want to check out and this is something that is worth buying. So in this case, if you're really trying to explore how to use this channel to meet the need of your buyer and launch your book well, is you're going to want to leverage book clubs, podcasts, community events, anything that's going to build personal connection. And I also think it's important that we understand this. The online world is really relatively new. It just is. Is it not an important tool for us to use to market well? Absolutely. It's a great tool. But if we go back to the basics, organic reach and organic marketing, and the word simply spreading from one person, one organization to another, is how this was done for years. So don't be afraid of the idea of an organic channel that you simply plant and God waters and grows and then harvests. It's okay to go a little old school. Now, if you want to try putting this into practice in a way that is going to be effective for you, let's go to the next slide, which is another little exercise. And what I would encourage you to do is to go back to this particular training and maybe just spend some time here. We're also on Saturday when we have our coaching call, which you'll want to make sure that you attend. We'll kind of work through some of these exercises and talk through maybe where you got stuck, talk through maybe where you have questions, talk through any place that you feel you just need somebody else's eyes on your decision making and or the places that you're considering and the channels you're considering using to launch and market your book well. So this particular exercise, choose one again, we're gonna make it really simple, really simple, y'all. One online channel, one offline channel. So an online channel, Instagram, an offline channel, a bookstore, okay? Super easy. Write down 1 or 2 ways under each channel you could create content or events specifically for that channel, okay? If you have any questions, come on Saturday and I'll answer them for you. So moving right along, because Carol's going to be like, Sarah, you are talking way too long. It's what happens when you end up hiring a speech teacher who has brain fogginess issues to give a message that is brief. Brevity is not my spiritual gift. I hold to the fast truth. I hopefully have others, but brevity is not one of them. So step number 1, where's your buyer spending their time, his or her time? Step number 2, what are some of those channels that you can use and what needs do they specifically meet? And then step number 3, focus and engage on those chosen channels. This is where you put pen to paper and you really identify what you are going to do. Content-wise, plan-wise, contact out into the community if you're partnering with somebody. This is like where you put pen to paper and you put a plan together so you can get her done. Because it's wonderful to sit there and brainstorm. If you don't actually do the thing, nothing is going to happen for you. Under this step, we're going to talk about I can count 4 tips on how to really focus and engage on those or in those marketing channels. So how are we effective here? Number 1, we're effective if we are consistent. Consistency is the key to literally every marketing tool out there. The second you establish a pattern and you don't repeat that pattern, people are like, what's she talking about? Me on Facebook Lives. I have stopped and started that a million times over, and for whatever reason, I just can't get my act together there. People don't see me as a reliable source for live content or information. Good, bad, or ugly, that is the truth, because I have not been consistent about it. But I will tell you this. When I was given 6 weeks, well, I wasn't given 6 weeks. I just didn't know I only had 6 weeks. When my book launch date was announced to me, it had been announced to the world. I just hadn't jumped on the train yet. There was one thing that I did consistently because it was something that I could do quickly. So on Facebook, remember I said Facebook is my jam. Facebook is where my buyers are. So I knew I wanted to create daily content there. I would cross promote it, use it other places, but I didn't have a lot of time to create this big, wonderful, magical plan. I had to be efficient. So I went to my devotional and I had a post that highlighted one of the scriptures, and that was like on Monday. On Tuesday, I had a post that highlighted one of the prayers, and that was every single Tuesday. On Wednesday, I had a graphic, and when I say post, I mean a graphic that highlighted my book is even when. So every devotion has an even when statement. That happened every single Wednesday. Every single Thursday was a graphic that had an endorsement or a review promoting even when and saying how it made a difference in the reader's life or in the endorser's life. And then the last graphic, so on Friday, was a quote from the book. I had templates for each piece of content, and then I was so stinking consistent. I'm pretty sure people got tired of me, but it was for 12 weeks. I did it 6 weeks leading up, and then I did it 6 weeks afterwards. Because I was consistent, it was a great campaign, and we saw a lot of sales happen in that time that happened directly as a result of marketing on Facebook. So, number 1, you have to be consistent if you're going to be effective using these marketing channels to sell your book and launch it well. Number 2, so number 1, be consistent. Number 2, you need to make sure that you provide value. And this is really, really hard because we want people to buy our books, right? But we do not want to be annoying about it, because even in a situation where we are literally trying to get people to buy something from us, every post, every event, every email should serve the buyer, inspiring, educating, solving a problem for them. It should not always be about the sale. And I'm going to say this really pointedly, and I'm not calling out any one person, but I think it's always good to kind of, what are the places that feel uncomfortable for you as a buyer? It's usually the ones where it's like, good grief, every post is buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, oh, and buy my book. We have to be in a position, especially when we are creating relationship, when we are creating trust, when we are showing our potential buyer that this book is something that will meet their needs. We can't get on the buy my book wagon. We have to be willing to show value, but in a way that is buyer focused. And I know that can feel counterintuitive, but in the long term, it will be the most successful. The third way to be effective as you are choosing your marketing channels and putting pen to paper and creating a plan is to engage with your audience. And y'all, I have a hard time with this one. I think part of it is just the time period that my life currently finds itself. Unexpected journeys, lots of activity. My house is very noisy, very full, very all the things. And so for me to be able to sit down and do all the social media stuff, I'm horrible. On my personal Facebook account, I am an absolute disgrace, but it's where I can give. I'm pretty consistent though. If you see me on my Facebook page, I will at the very least, and this is like bare bones, at least like a comment, a share, whatever it is that somebody has done in your main marketing channel to engage with you, engage back, even if it's minimum. But I will say, as you are getting closer to launching that book, you want to increase even the minimum. You want to make sure that you respond to comments, that you treat people, whether it's in social media or it's even follow up from a book signing where somebody says, oh, hey, could I send you this? Or, oh, hey, I say as the author, I will send you XYZ. Make sure you follow through on that engagement because, again, what is old school? Old school is word of mouth. And so when people know that you are trustworthy, when people know that you have said something and you have followed through, people will buy your book. Because even though we don't want to believe it, we are connected to our message, even if we're writing fiction. So always be mindful of that. Always be willing to engage, set appropriate boundaries, but understand that one of the ways that you serve your buyer is also by engaging with them as well. And especially as you're building up to that launch, that is going to need to increase and increase ways that are meaningful, not just ones that are simple. So that's the third way to be effective. The fourth and final way, I think, that really identifies how to be effective when you choose a specific marketing channel that matches with your buyer's needs is to partner strategically. And I pointed to this a little bit when I talked about the book about TJ and where did TJ go for sweet little older brothers and sisters who are trying to make sense of loss in their world. You want to work smarter, not harder, and you want to collaborate with people, influencers. Again, People can only say no if you ask. If there is somebody that you serve the same buyer, you serve the same reader, ask them. Worst they can do is say no. Connect with churches, ministries that have the same message, the same person that they are serving. Collaborate with them. If you're writing a children's book, then I would partner with a podcast that is a parenting podcast, because you're tapping into that audience and you're really maximizing that particular channel, because you have an aligned purpose, you have an aligned passion, and you have an aligned buyer and market. So very, very important that as you're identifying what channels meet the needs of your buyer, that you do it with intention and purpose, and you make sure that you work smarter rather than harder. The exercise that I'm going to throw out at you is this: to practice this particular step. There we go. One step. And it doesn't have to be 4 minutes, because some of us are super, super, super fast at things. That would not be me. Clearly, we are now on minute 41, so bless our hearts. But what it does do is it gives you a direction. So even if it takes you some time to kind of work through that, give yourself the grace of just focusing on one step. You don't need to do multiple at this point. So I want you to draft an idea. It can be for an Instagram post, maybe that it's promoting a theme that your book covers, or maybe it focuses on that central message that you've already created, because we want to definitely use these as kind of building blocks to creating good launching strategies. The other thing you could do is you could brainstorm an event, whether it's a book signing, or maybe it's a fair, or what else? Or, I know, reading children's books, storytime hour at the library. It could be any number of things, but pick that one idea, and I think, one idea for your online, one for your offline, just kind of like what we did for, am I right? Yeah. For exercise, the exercise that went with step 2. So do one for your offline, one for your online, and then let it sit, let it marinate, and bring your ideas on Saturday so we can go through them. Just remember, in all of this, these are steps that you can take to make sure that the message God has given you goes through the channels where people will be reached. Always focus on the people at the other end of these channels. Don't focus so much on the minutia that you miss the people. That's what it's all about. This just helps you get there. Have a beautiful day. I don't know that I see any comments. Oh, maybe there are some comments. Let's see if there's any questions. Colleen, sorry, I have to go. Well, yes, you probably did, because I talked so blessedly long. Del Bates, oh, wonderful to see you. Susan, wonderful to see you as well again. Well, I have enjoyed our time together. I hope I made sense. And just know, again, as you choose these channels, let God be your guide. He won't steer you wrong. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. I really am going, I promise. There we go.